All right, very good. This is Gita Dhyana, meditation on the Gita. It's written in Sanskrit, but here translated in English for us. Om. O Bhagavad Gita, by which Arjuna was illumined by Lord Krishna himself, and which was composed of 18 chapters within the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Divine Mother, destroyer of rebirth, who showers the nectar of oneness upon us, O Bhagavad Gita, my affectionate mother, on thee I meditate. All the Upanishads are the cows. The milker is the cowherd boy, Krishna. Arjuna is the calf, and people of purified intellect are the drinkers. The milk is the supreme nectar of the Gita. My salutations to the Lord, who is the source of supreme bliss, whose grace makes the mute eloquent and the crippled cross mountains. Hari Om Tat Sat. Okay. So the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita is really the whole Bhagavad Gita all over again. The title of it, the discourse, it's the Yoga of Wisdom through Enunciation, which is really the whole concept of yoga, the concept that we work with, the truth that's shared with us by the greats, Jesus and all of the saints of all of the traditions. The truth that's shared with us is that the kingdom is inside, God is inside. In the Sanskrit tradition, we get, there's so many different words that are pointers, and there's one that's a descriptor that's in Sanskrit. It's called Satchidananda, which translates, it's Sat, the first word Sat, truth, but also existence is a way to deal with it. Chit, meaning consciousness or knowledge, and Ananda, meaning bliss, or we could say happiness, but fullness, like that, fullness. And that's a descriptor word for the Absolute, for the Father, for God in the fullness of God. And meaning like this, existence absolute. In other words, where does our existence come from? That, Father. Knowledge absolute. This whole process of chasing knowledge, where does that come from? The quest of knowledge, the knowledge itself, the highest knowledge, where is it? That, the highest. We participate in it, but it all resides within the totality of consciousness. Ananda, where is the happiness that I seek? Well, that one we hear a lot, inside, not outside. So, in the 18th chapter, what we've covered so far, and we're today sloka 50, either 54 or 56. We'll see when we open. 54 is what we'll start at. The 18th chapter is 78 slokas, and it starts with a question which relates to this. So, if God is all of this, including happiness, and I am a child of God, or I am of God, and by the way, being a child of means I'm essentially the same as you. If that's so, then why is it that I'm not experiencing all of this now? And the great yogi will say, well, you've come apart in a way, separated in a way. How? You've wrapped yourself in veils that have covered up the truth, like this. And so, what is the way home? To uncover what's not serving, to remove it. So in the 18th, Arjuna asked this question, and the 18th chapter is called the Wisdom Through Enunciation. Most of us would think we become wise by adding things. We become wise by learning more and more and more until we finally learn it all. But in fact, it said, but it doesn't work that way ultimately, because that wisdom already exists and it's within, and it's become hidden from you because you've added so much meaningless stuff in this quest for knowledge. We've added so much that finally we've lost it, but it's still here. And so we have to uncover it, like peeling the apple. And so to get at the fruit. And so the key is said to be renunciation. Christ and Jesus in Sermon on the Mount, which is the highest teaching, which is really the same teaching as the Eightfold Path, as Raja Yoga, as all of these, as what Lord Krishna is teaching here. He's talking about letting go of things. He says, the meek shall inherit the earth. He doesn't say the one who's full of everything will. It's the one who lets go of the ego sense and all of this bigness, who finds the meaning within. So here, renunciation. Same. So Arjuna asks a question at the beginning of chapter 18, which is really what to renounce and how to renounce. And that's what starts this last discourse in the Gita. What's the difference between renunciation of action that's self-centered, called in Sanskrit samyasa, and renouncing the fruit of the action, or the expectation of the fruit of the action, which is called tyaga in Sanskrit. And so we've had this discussion, and it's taken us through a beautiful discussion. It really is the whole Gita. Again, a discussion of who are you and who am I, from the Lord, from the Absolute. Jesus often in the Bible speaks in the same way. The Father speaks through him. He says, for example, you can do nothing without me, and that's the Father speaking through. In the Bhagavad Gita, most everything when Krishna speaks, it's not Krishna as a limited form. It's not someone that could actually be here. It's that Absolute speaking through. And so in this 18th, we've discussed the relationship between I and thee, I and you, my dear Lord. Who's where, who's what, and it takes us through who are we and what is action anyway, and who is acting. I tell you, the funniest thing is we all walk around having the notion that we're doing something, but the truth is we're not. One of the most inconvenient sayings from the Bible is when Jesus says, you can do nothing without me. That's very inconvenient. You very rarely hear any ministers talking about it. It's the funniest thing, but it's a significant focus in the Gita, and it's so meaningful because everybody likes to think that God is only good, that if I'm to do something bad, I do that on my own. But if I'm doing good, God is doing that. But in fact, you can do nothing without me. There's a discussion here about the role that we play as individuals, which is very, very interesting and mind-blowing. So we have the notion, each of us, that we're so individual that we do everything ourselves. I think myself, I choose myself, I act myself. This is my hand. I pick up this cup with my hand. I speak with my voice. And it's so convoluted because all of this stuff is universal stuff. And we do this. And Hari, you can laugh, you can do it or not do it, but we're going to. If you take a moment, whenever we have new, we have to do. If you take a moment, just set your hand on your lap. And pay attention to this. See if you can lift up your hand and look at it. Bring it to where you can look at it, and then put it back down. And then the question, Janaki, the question is, what did you do? Nothing. And there's a question, Taylor, it may even sound really, really weird, but what are you aware of doing? There's something that you did, if you reflect on it. But in that, were you aware of the muscles moving? You're aware of it. Did you do it? No. Are you aware of the intelligence required in order to make that precise movement? Are you aware of it? Did you do it? Did you think about every one of those steps of how to move this finger this way, how to turn the hand around, all of this? You didn't, did you? You did something. What did you do? What was your role? I said, and Hari gave us a really good example of this the other day because he refused to do it. I said, and he's like, I've done this so many times, I don't need to do it. So you played a role, and what was the role that you played? You willed it. You willed it. That's a beautiful realization, which helps to put this world and this life in a really lovely perspective, which is you willed it or not. So somehow you participated in a choice, I'm going to do it or not. And then when you said yes, you simply willed it. You set an intention for it to do. And then all of the mechanics of doing it happened. And you can be aware of them, but you didn't do it. When Christ says you can do nothing without me, this is exactly what he's talking about. Is I'm the one that chooses, finally, but we have a role in it, which is we will. Now, if there were a 50-pound brick sitting on your hand, it would have taken very strong willpower. And the muscles would have really had to be tense, but still that's a universal force. It's a universal factor doing it. Although your will would have had to have been very strong to do. So we step through this discussion, and it leads us to this very interesting realization that I'm not really doing, but I take myself to be. And so the notion that I'm doing, that I deserve, that I need, all of these ego-centered notions, which are really rooted in ignorance, they don't serve. They don't serve. And what they actually do is they separate us. This life is so divine, is the word that comes. Everything that's here was intentionally crafted by the Creator from his or her own nature. And is controlled by the Creator, his or her own nature, even now. Even the will, ultimately. We have some, but ultimately, the universal will is bigger than the individual will. For the one whose limbs are paralyzed, they can still will. But if the hand doesn't move, then that puts it in perspective. Although it's exactly what we do. If have you ever had a broken arm, broken leg? Yeah. Has it been in a cast? Yeah. Do you remember what it was like when the cast was taken off? Do you remember how hard it was to move? Do you remember what you did in order to get it to move? Yeah. And if you relate to will, you see you kept willing it. And at the beginning, it was very, very hard, right? But you just kept doing it over and over again. And in time, it became easier and it began to move again. If you relate to it this way, you see the power of will. And you can see the relationship between individual will and universal will, which is I will, if we read Swami Premananda's up here, I will, my will is never done. He never wills, his will is ever done. It's an interesting relationship. And then the rest of it is all universal. Everything else is universal. The saints and sages will say things that sound crazy to the rest of us, like, this is all God. Everything is God. We're just not seeing. We're not seeing. And Jesus would be said to come in order to cure our sight so that we could see who's really here. And this is what's going on in the Gita as well. We're being taught to let go of what's not serving, what prevents us from seeing who's here, what's here. Everything that's universal, I didn't do it as an individual. I didn't design this body. I didn't design this muscle system. And clearly there's intelligence all through it. And I can't take credit for that as an individual. So the work of spiritual life really ultimately is learning to see what's here. As we step into these shlokas, and I'll read two of them. I'll read 54 and 55. It's actually talking about something that's mind-boggling as we get to this. Becoming Brahman, becoming God. Sounds so heretical. Number 54. Becoming Brahman, serene in the self. He neither grieves nor desires the same to all beings. He obtains supreme devotion unto me. By devotion, he knows me in truth, what and why I am. Then having known me in truth, he forthwith enters into the supreme. And what we've been talking about to this point is this renunciation, letting go of what doesn't serve, learning the relationship, learning to trust, learning to have some faith in it like this, step by step. And then it brings us to this concept of knowing, but knowing requires us to be in union. It's the same thing. There's an analogy that came while we were sitting here chanting kirtan. I used to really enjoy driving cars. And I still do. I still enjoy driving cars. For a little while, I fancied myself to be a race car driver at some point because I enjoyed it so much that I thought. And so this analogy came, which is I could study cars, I could read about cars, I could purchase cars, I could read the spec sheets, I could talk with people that drove cars and knew cars. But in order to know the car, what did I have to do?
You had to drive it.
I had to drive it. And there's so much, because the cars have so much to them, I had to drive them a lot. And still, if you asked me, I would say, well, hey! Back when I was driving, Indianapolis was a big thing, and I grew up in Indianapolis, so I inquired inside for the name of a race car driver, and A.J. Foyt came. I don't know if anybody ever heard of A.J. Foyt, but he was one of the famous drivers in Indianapolis. Good morning, Dow. Hi, sweetheart. Hi. We're all good. Oh. So A.J. Foyt knew cars better than anybody I could imagine. He knew driving and he knew the cars because that was his life. His entire life was dedicated not to studying them, but to knowing them. Does that differentiation make sense? Generally speaking, when we think about knowing something, we think, okay, I'm going to pick up a book and study it. But actually knowing, if someone says, I want to know God, you're going to have to learn to live in God. And that's the greatest joy of life, by the way, is to really know in this way, is to really know. Knowing, just like that car, means living it. And not living something else. If you want to know well, you have to live it completely. And that process of living it is a process of becoming. So he became a knower of cars by living his life as a car, if it were, or in union with cars. And the one who becomes a knower of God is one who lives in God in the same way. And so when we get to these sutras, this is really what's being discussed. It's possible to know that all of this is universal. We can study it. We can look at our experience. But to really know it, you're going to have to dive in. You're going to have to dive in. And this is where the Gita teaching is now, is how to dive in. So just a little bit of the commentary from Swami Venkatesh. He says, there's an ever-present danger in reading a textbook on yoga. One becomes intellectually conscious of a goal on the authority of the author of the text. This often tempts one to imagine having reached the goal or to despair of ever getting there. To us, even the yoga prescribed in verse 46, which had, I'll read it. He who from all beings have evolved and by whom all this is pervaded, which is the Absolute, worshipping that one with due performance, or Christ, the Christ nature, worshipping that one with the due performance of his own duty, man attains to perfection. The same perfection when Jesus says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, be therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. The human itself could never be perfect as a separate entity, but the essence is perfect. And so one letting go of all of the personal baggage and coming back into the center then becomes one with that essence, is one with that essence already. So Swamiji says, the one who's reached it discovers that the goal is further on. That perfected seeker acquires fitness for becoming Brahman. Becoming Brahman is still a state of becoming, not being. He sees his own self in all, and he realizes that the same God dwells in all beings. But still there's a subtle and hence powerful sense of individuality. There's no selfishness or vanity. There's no grief or desire. The mind is serene, and the heart is filled with supreme devotion. So he's speaking a bit of the experience. But the experience is one to be tasted. We can just say generally that when we say, I want to know God, that really means this. And also, there's not a single teacher that says it's impossible or that you're apart from knowing. Everyone will say you can. It requires a great commitment. And your life will lead you to that. There's a notion or an idea that I have to give up on something in order to know the highest. And that's also baggage. All we actually have to give up on is hatred, anger, fear, delusion, the sense of separation, the things that we don't serve. That's actually what's needing to be renounced. That's the only thing to give up on. Love, you don't have to give up. You have the capacity to be the fullness of it. Without fear, without anger, without hatred, you can imagine, then it's possible to love everyone as your own self. Just like that commandment. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, and all thy mind, and love thy neighbor as thyself. So when we strip away what seems to be separating us, when we strip away the mental and emotional states that are arising, which it's possible to do, we wouldn't say easy, but it's actually straightforward. Science of yoga deals with this. How to strip away what's not serving, how to learn deeper levels of reality so that fear will vanish. Finally, we have this conversation a lot. Residual fear, when I was walking pilgrimage, it's the funniest thing. I'll share this. It's the funniest thing. Okay, you're around here somewhere. We'll get you. I mean, really, this is. You might think this is freaky, but we were talking a little bit yesterday about conscious mind and subconscious mind, and we'll do more through the weekend. Some discussion and a little work with it. Subconscious mind is a reactive aspect. It's not there accidentally, but it's there through prior choices, and it's the animal nature in us. It's not bad. It's the animal nature in us. Very much identified with the form as being who we are. And the conscious mind is the discriminative faculty, the ability to ask questions, to learn, etc., etc. Where I found myself when I started walking pilgrimage is I knew that I didn't die. There it is, out of the bag. I knew that I wasn't the body, consciously. I was sure of it. Not because of what I read in a book, although what I read in a book helped. It was because I looked at the experiences and it all made sense. So I knew it consciously. I accepted it. I had faith in it. But as I walked, what I would deal with is constantly being bombarded with sense experiences, and these feelings of not being in control, and something could happen at any moment, because in pilgrimage you're subject to whatever anybody wants to do to you. If somebody wants to pull out a gun and say, "Have a good day," you're right there. And so sometimes that thought would come. From where? From the subconscious mind, of course. So constantly feeling that I'm going to die. And then sometimes I would consciously consider it and I would just laugh. But still, because of the fact that 95, 98, 99% of our thought is really reactive thought. It's something happens and a thought arises because of it. For months and months, we lived that way, where I kept checking in, conscious mind, asking what to do, and intuition, God says, keep going. And how to connect with me. I knew how to connect. Chanting a mantra, staying in the breath, thinking of you alone, and the prescription is given. Think only of me, devote completely to me, offer everything to me. That's the practice. Jesus says it, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, all thy mind. Loving all thy heart is devotion, bhakti, devotion. All thy soul, the soul force, the willpower. The willpower, act for me. And the mind, what does the mind do? Thinks. So think of me. So that's the formula, and I would apply it. But still, things would happen. Or And fear, we were discussing, fear is the anticipation of things happening. Things don't have to happen to have fear. That all occurs in the mind. And when you're out there, and like completely naked, and anything can happen at any moment, there's a lot that can happen in the mind. So we would practice the steadiness of the mind, and then. But what's on the other side of it? On the other side of it is a knowing. Where the knowledge becomes lived knowledge, experiential knowledge, where it becomes integrated, and even the reactive nature falls into line. And the fear, at some point, consciously we could say, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? You're there.
Yeah.
You know it. There's nothing to be afraid of. Why be afraid?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you'll feel the fear arise, yes? And at some point, if it's strong enough, lose yourself to it, yes?
Yeah.
That's our human experience. But so beautiful. We're getting a beautiful show of the power of the Lord in action. Love breaks down all separation, all barriers. Morning, down. Oh. Strong motherhood Shakti in you, dear one. Oh. Just like that. Tao has been dealing with fear of the unknown. And so he hasn't been around people. And now, just for the last couple of weeks, he's been around people. And so he also feels those too. Conscious mind is really just developing, just beginning to develop. But there are the two forces within us, which is the God force that says, love all as your own self. Huh? And that's there. And then there is the fear, the subconscious stuff about, but this might happen and that might happen. And what if? And so he's learning. And that's the situation with us. We're becoming. Through the learning, we're becoming. And ultimately what's being laid out here is we're becoming that which we seek. That this learning is really this. Jesus would never say it's not possible. There are many people that would say it's not, but Jesus would never say it's not. And he gives the formula, pick up your cross and follow me. And this is true with Krishna, what Krishna is sharing. No, you are me. In essence, you are me. You've forgotten. And I'm helping you with this. In the same way, happiness. Happiness, all the good, all the things that we really want are in the kingdom. And they're all right here, right now. Oh. Questions or comments before we close? Anything? Dao, do you have anything else to add? Thank you for your demonstration this morning. Janki? No? Okay. Okay, we'll close final prayers in RT, page 174. I would like to add this for you and for Taylor. We all have the dream, the feeling that real love is possible, that real happiness is possible. In fact, we're so urged to it that we don't stop looking for it. In the fairy tales, we hear the story, all the fairy tales end with the love ever after. And what we find is it's actually possible. It's actually the reality. It's actually who we are. So we encourage you not to stop seeking. We encourage you to know that what you seek is possible. It's not ultimately to be found in the things or experiences, but the things and the experiences are so important in terms of learning and integrating. So. Okay, page 174. We can chat together. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Surandip Pushtivardhanam Orvai Nivandana Rachor Mukshya Amritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Surandip Pushtivardhanam Orvai Nivandana Rachor Mukshya Amritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Surandip Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukmeva Rachor Mukshya Amritat Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Sarve Bhavatu Sukhinaha Sarve Shanti Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Makashi Dukapar Bhave Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mritorma Mritam Gamaya Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamahadaya Purnameva Vasishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptation and to control the mind. Free us from egoids of lust, anger, greed, hatred, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember thee. Let us ever sing thy glories. Let thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in thee forever and ever. Humble Lord Sacred Shivananda Maharaj. And for all of the saints and sages of all the traditions.